A black woman, holding a first-class ticket, a routine flight, a seat that was rightfully hers. But 9 minutes later, she was sitting in coach, humiliated. What happened in those few minutes would spark a national firestorm. But this isn't just a story about airline policy. It's about silence, about the quiet ways dignity is stolen, one microaggression at a time. Who gets to belong at the front of the plane? Why was a woman with power, presence, and credentials still told to wait her turn? And what does it take for someone to stand up, not just for themselves, but for a system that has long whispered, "You don't belong here"? Dr. Camille Rivers didn't fight with fists. She didn't scream. She chose something far more disruptive. She made the world listen. This story will challenge you. It will move you. And by the end, you might never see a boarding gate the same way again. If this story touches something in you, your sense of justice, your belief in quiet power, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's begin. It was still dark when the kettle whistled. The house was quiet, wrapped in the kind of silence only a pre-dawn Los Angeles could offer. Outside the windows, palm trees swayed gently in the marine layer, cloaking the street lights in fog. Dr. Camille Rivers stood in her kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile, pouring hot water over peppermint leaves in her ceramic mug. She liked routine, stillness, control. At 40, she had learned how to move through the world in deliberate ways, measured, calculated, always composed. But this morning felt different. The day ahead held weight, though not for the reasons people might assume. Most would have guessed she was nervous about the deal. The $320 million contract with Airline that could change the future of in-flight safety systems across the country. But Camille wasn't worried about the contract. She was worried about being seen, or rather, being unseen, in the living room. Her father stirred. At 79, Calvin Rivers still rose with the sun, a habit from his Air Force days. He'd flown in Korea, trained with the last of the Tuskegee Airmen. To Camille, he was the strongest man alive. She also knew he watched her closer than he admitted. "You sure you want to fly today?" he asked gently as he walked in, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Camille looked up from her mug. "The meeting's in Chicago. If I cancel now, they'll think I'm not serious." "They don't know it's you, though, do they?" he asked, settling into the leather armchair she'd bought him 2 Christmases ago. She shook her head. "Not yet. They just know the CEO of Neuroglide is coming. No photos, no interviews. I wanted them to value the work before they judge the face." Her father leaned forward. "I get it. I do. But you walk on that plane today. Don't you dare shrink. Not for them. Not for anyone." Camille took a slow sip of tea. "I won't." A beat of silence passed before he added, "Softer this time. They still won't see you coming. Baby, that's your edge." She looked at him, then his hands folded, his shoulders slightly hunched with age, but his eyes still sharp, still ready for battle. The same way hers would be today. By the time she arrived at LAX, the sky had shifted from steel gray to the faintest hint of orange. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, tailored but understated. No flashy designer logos, just clean lines and soft power. Her carry-on was compact, efficient. Inside it, a backup of the Neuroglide safety briefing, a water bottle, 2 protein bars, and the signed contract sealed in an envelope with a silver clip. Check-in was smooth. She always flew Oralis for business. And this route LA to Chicago was familiar. But familiarity didn't mean comfort. At the TSA checkpoint, her ID was scanned twice. Then again, a third time. The agent didn't say anything, just raised his hand and called over a supervisor. "Random screening," the supervisor said, barely meeting her eyes. Camille nodded, removed her shoes, spread her arms, and endured the ritual. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't huff. She just noted the difference how the man in front of her, white and in cargo shorts, had breezed through without a glance. It was subtle. It always was. By the time she reached Gate 43B, passengers were already crowding the boarding lane. She scanned the overhead screen. Auralus Air Flight 618. Departure 8:20 a.m. Arrival O'Hare 2:45 p.m. Gate confirmed. She approached the desk calmly, showing her mobile boarding pass to the agent. The woman behind the counter glanced at it, frowned, then tapped at her keyboard. Just a moment. Ma'am?" Camille said nothing. The agent glanced over at her coworker, who leaned in, whispered something, then asked for a paper copy. "I have the digital pass. It was scanned at security." Camille replied, "Steady." The woman hesitated, then printed a new boarding pass and handed it to her. "All right, you're good to go. Enjoy your flight." Camille took the ticket, nodded once, and stepped aside. She always flew first class. It wasn't about luxury, it was about space. Silence. Time to think. And today, more than ever, she needed all three. As she waited in the priority line, she noticed a man in a tailored suit walking up white, tall, expensive haircut. He made eye contact with the agent and got waved through without so much as a scan. Camille blinked, counted to 3, then walked forward. The flight attendant at the door smiled politely. "Welcome aboard." She returned the smile, but her eyes remained sharp. Seat 1C, aisle. The best spot. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the scent of pressurized air and synthetic lemon-scented wipes. This was it, in 6 hours. She'd either walk away with a landmark deal or walk away knowing she stood for something bigger. But first, she had to survive the flight. Dr. Camille Rivers had settled into her seat in first class not out of vanity, but necessity. After years of red-eye flights and cramped cabins, she understood the value of space. It wasn't about champagne or warm towels. It was about room to think, space to breathe. And today, she needed both. The plane hadn't begun boarding the rest of the passengers yet. The cabin was quiet. Dim lighting hummed overhead. A flight attendant moved past, adjusting the headrest covers. Camille glanced at her watch. 7:48, Mum. She pulled out her tablet and opened the presentation file. Diagrams of aviation risk mitigation systems filled the screen-clean lines, annotated modules, emergency sequence graphs. Her software had been designed to catch what autopilots missed in bad weather. It had already saved lives, even if few knew her name. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and made a quick voice note. Add visual example of Denver wind shear incident. Emphasize AI override lag time in legacy systems. She was about to return to the document when a shadow fell across her. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass again?" It was the flight attendant. A different one now. Blonde, crisp uniform, pleasant expression, with just enough edge to raise an eyebrow. Camille looked up. "Of course." She handed the pass over. The attendant studied it, tilted her head, then scanned the seat row number. There might be a mistake here. Camille kept her voice even. "It's 1C. Confirmed on both the digital pass and the printed one your gate issued." The attendant's smile faltered. "Yes." but I believe someone else may have been assigned this seat." Camille didn't flinch. "Then there's a duplicate, not a mistake on my end." The attendant straightened slightly. "I'll check with the gate." She left. Camille exhaled through her nose, slow and quiet. Her fingers gently closed the tablet cover. She glanced to the front of the cabin, where a tall man in a gray suit was stepping aboard. He was on his phone, barking instructions about a quarterly report and a pending acquisition. He glanced down the row, saw Camille in one seat, then looked at the attendant. She whispered something. He frowned. Camille's stomach tensed, not from fear, but from familiarity. She had seen this choreography before. The signals were subtle, but they spoke loudly to those trained to hear them. The man in the suit approached. "You're in my seat," he said casually, as if addressing a clerk who'd bagged his groceries wrong. Camille didn't move. "No, I'm in my seat." He held up a printed boarding pass. 1C. See, she held hers beside his. "Same. Mine was issued first." The man turned to the flight attendant. "Well," she hesitated. "Mr. Sloan, we'll resolve this in just a moment." Camille's fingers curled around her armrest. Still calm, still composed, but she could feel the weight building behind her ribcage. Another attendant approached. Younger, black, male, wearing a name tag that read Theo. He carried himself with quiet respect. When he spoke, his tone had gentleness in it. "Ma'am, I understand this is frustrating. We're checking with the captain." Camille nodded once. She didn't want to make a scene. Not because she feared conflict, but because she understood that black women weren't allowed to express anger without consequence. She had learned that long before she had her first patent. The cabin filled slowly. Other passengers began to look up. Whisper. She caught fragments. She should just take another seat. Why does she have to make this difficult? Maybe she snuck into first class. And then the captain appeared. He was in his late 50s, blue eyes, clean uniform, a clipped voice honed by decades of authority. "What's going on here?" he asked. Theo explained the conflict. The captain turned to Camille. "Miss, if you wouldn't mind, we can reseat you just for today. We're running a bit behind." Camille didn't blink. "I do mind. I purchased this seat weeks ago. The gate agent issued the ticket again this morning. Your system double-booked, not me." The captain sighed. "Be that as it may, I'm asking you to be flexible so we can get this flight out on time." "The man, Mr. Sloan smirked slightly. That was enough. Camille said nothing. She stood up slowly, handed her ticket to Theo, and looked the captain in the eye. "I'm moving under protest. Please note that." Theo nodded. She picked up her bag, passed Mr. Sloan, and walked down the aisle, trying to ignore the stares, trying not to notice the woman shaking her head or the man pretending not to see. She reached row 19, middle seat. The woman at the window slid her bag over without looking up. The man on the aisle grunted and kept his earbuds in. Camille sat. She folded her coat, placed it gently on her lap, and stared ahead. The cabin dimmed as boarding closed. The safety video began to play. Camille didn't watch. Her mind was too full. Why hadn't she insisted harder? Why did she comply again, just to keep the peace? Because she knew how this story usually ended. Because women like her didn't get the benefit of the doubt. They got the side eyes, the unspoken questions, the security calls. She'd seen the same pattern play out with her own mother at department stores, at her high school, in boardrooms where her ideas were repeated by others until a white man took credit. No matter how many degrees she had, no matter how much money she made, no matter how quiet or polite or dignified she remained, sometimes they still couldn't see her. Or worse, they could but chose not to acknowledge it. As the plane rolled toward the runway, Camille stared at the tray table in front of her. There was a small chip in the plastic, a jagged sliver where the molding had failed. She ran her finger over it absently. A college-age woman beside her, young, Latina. Curly dark hair glanced over and offered her an unopened snack pack of almonds. "You looked like you could use these," she said gently. Camille smiled faintly. "Thanks." "You handled that better than I would have," the girl added. Camille chuckled, but her voice was low. "You'd be surprised what you get used to." The girl nodded. "I'm Lucia. Camille." They shook hands briefly. Something warm passed between them. Recognition. As the plane lifted into the sky, Camille leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and took a breath. She didn't know it yet, but in less than 4 hours, the very people who'd asked her to move would be begging to meet with her behind closed doors, and by the end of the day, their names wouldn't be on the contract, but hers would, and not just as a signature, as a reckoning. The seatbelt sign had gone off, but Camille hadn't moved. She sat still, palms folded in her lap, shoulders slightly drawn and not out of fear, but focus. She wasn't angry yet. That came later. Right now, she was thinking. The humiliation was fresh, like an ember pressed beneath her skin. It didn't scream. It simmered. That, she had learned, was how you stayed sharp. Rage made people reckless, and she couldn't afford reckless. From row 19, the curtain that divided first class from economy seemed heavier than usual, as if it weren't just fabric, but steel, designed to close out voices like hers, experiences like hers. She stared at it for a long time. Lucia beside her had returned to her podcast, occasionally tapping her foot to whatever rhythm filled her earbuds. The kindness of strangers was a balm, but not a solution. Camille reached into her bag and pulled out her tablet again. She tapped open a secured document, one the Oralis executives hadn't seen yet. It was an addendum, a clause that would allow Neuroglide to terminate the deal within 30 minutes of presentation if Camille deemed the partnership ethically compromised. She had written it 6 months ago, quietly, without fanfare. Her legal team had questioned it. Seems a bit extreme. One had said, what exactly would qualify as ethically compromised? Camille had looked him dead in the eyes and replied, when my dignity is considered negotiable. Now, sitting in the cheap seat of her own damn flight, that clause didn't seem extreme at all. It felt prophetic. She highlighted the text again, rereading every word. Then she locked the screen. Behind her, the beverage cart rattled closer. Would you like something to drink? The attendant asked. A young man, newer, nervous smile. Water, please. He handed her a small plastic cup, half full. She thanked him, sipped, and looked out the window. The clouds stretched like frozen waves across the sky. The sun was just beginning to break through, casting a faint orange glow that painted everything soft gold. It would have been beautiful if she hadn't been so tired. She closed her eyes and tried to rest. But sleep didn't come. Instead, memories rose. She was 10 years old again, sitting beside her mother at the back of a theater. They had tickets, but no one offered them a better seat when others failed to show. So they sat quietly behind the curtain line, necks craned. She remembered asking her mother why they didn't move forward. Her mother had said, sometimes, baby, the world needs to believe we don't belong there. But the moment we walk down that aisle anyway, We remind them we do. Camille had never forgotten that. The plane hit a patch of turbulence and jolted her back to the present. The seatbelt sign flickered on again. Passengers murmured. She looked forward. She could just make out the top of Bradley Sloan's head from between the seats. He was laughing at something, probably his own voice. She wondered if he even knew what neural glide was. If he even knew who she was. Probably not. That was the thing about certain men. They were so sure of their place in the world. They never stopped to wonder whose space they had taken. And that's when it hit her, not anger, not even hurt. Resolve. Camille Rivers didn't build neural glide by shrinking. She built it by outthinking them, outlasting them, and when necessary, outmaneuvering them. She took a deep breath and tapped her smartwatch. It synced automatically to the secure platform. She drafted a single sentence and scheduled it to send at landing. Clause 12 activated. Notify legal. Do not disclose yet. Simple, clean, quiet. The dominoes were already falling, but she wasn't done. From the corner of her eye, she saw Theo, the black flight attendant, making his way toward her row. His expression was tentative, but kind. He crouched slightly beside her. "Dr. Rivers," he said under his breath. She turned slowly. "Yes." He nodded with quiet respect. "I looked you up." She blinked. "I shouldn't have. Maybe. But I recognized the name on your pass after all that. Neural Glide. That's you." "Right." Camille tilted her head, cautious but curious. Theo continued. "I served in the Navy. Aviation technician. I know your system. It saved 2 of my people in a storm off Okinawa. It works. For a moment." She didn't speak. Then, gently, "Thank you." He looked down. What they did. That wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate. We've had complaints before. About Macy. And the captain. She nodded once. Not shocked, just saddened. "I appreciate your honesty," she said softly. "I don't want this job to make me complicit." He added, "You're not," she said. "Not anymore." He stood slowly and gave a small nod, then walked away. Camille sat back again. That had been the first real moment of truth all day. And it wasn't even lunchtime. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit some minor turbulence, but we're clear for now. We'll be landing in Chicago on time. Thank you for flying with Oralis." Camille looked out the window again. The clouds were thinning, the sky brighter. She glanced at her reflection in the glass, just faint enough to be mistaken for someone else. But she knew the woman staring back. And she wasn't going to let anyone pretend she didn't belong. Not today. Not ever again. As the city skyline of Chicago began to rise in the distance, her phone buzzed once. A message from her assistant. "Claire, media asked again if you want to go public with your attendance." Still declining, Camille stared at the screen. Then she replied, "Not yet." Because sometimes silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And the louder part of her story that was just beginning. As the wheels touched down at O'Hare, a shudder ran through the fuselage. Camille barely noticed it. Her eyes were fixed on the seat back in front of her, her mind hundreds of miles ahead. Landing announcements echoed through the cabin. Phones lit up. Passengers shifted impatiently, unbuckling seatbelts before the ding. A man near her reached for the overhead compartment with a grunt, nearly hitting Camille in the shoulder. She didn't flinch. Lucia leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" Camille turned. The girl's face was open, concerned. There was kindness there. Not pity, just awareness. "I'm fine," Camille replied softly. The curtain to first class snapped open, and Bradley Sloan strolled off the plane before anyone else could move. No goodbye, no glance back. Theo passed through the aisle a few moments later. Their eyes met. He gave a small nod. It was enough. As Camille stepped into the jet bridge, her spine straightened. The air was cooler here, sterile, scented faintly of jet fuel and strong coffee from the terminal. She walked with slow precision, no rush, but every step deliberate. Gate 17A was quiet except for the soft ding of departing passengers' phones. Oralis had arranged a black car to meet her at the executive terminal. Her assistant Claire had confirmed the driver and location the night before, but something told her not to go there just yet. She stopped by a window, pulled out her phone, and sent a message. "Hold, driver. I'll meet you in 20. I need to walk." Claire responded instantly. "Understood." Camille began walking. Past the overpriced convenience stores, past the buzzing cafe with half-awake travelers in line, past the security checkpoint where an older black woman was being patted down a second time, her eyes weary but unsurprised. She paused and watched. There were 5 lanes. Only one had 2 TSA agents. Only one had 4 passengers flagged for random screening. And all of them were people of color. Camille took a photo. Not to post. Not yet. But to remember. To connect the patterns. To remind herself that what happened on that plane wasn't isolated. It was systemic. And she was in a position to disrupt it. She walked toward the West Terminal. Oralis's private lounge was located near Gate 20B, disguised as an ordinary conference suite. The kind of place that looked nondescript on purpose. As she entered the elevator, she caught her reflection in the mirrored panel. Her expression hadn't changed since the flight. Composed. Still. But her eyes carried something new now. Something firmer. The elevator opened into a high-ceilinged reception room lined with frosted glass. 2 assistants sat at the desk. Both young white women with matching blazers and polite, clipped voices. "Welcome, Dr. Rivers," one of them said, checking her tablet. "The executive team is waiting in Suite A. May I take your bag?" "No, thank you," Camille replied. She walked down the hallway, the sound of her heels precise and soft. When she entered the suite, 6 men stood to greet her. 5 were Oralis board members. The 6th was their legal counsel. All white, all watching her closely now. The chair at the head of the table had a name placard, Dr. Camille Rivers. Camille didn't sit. "Before we begin," she said calmly, "I'd like to clarify the terms under which I'm here." One of the board members, Thomas Gallo, chuckled nervously. "Of course. We're thrilled you could join us in person." Her tone didn't change. "I was not upgraded to first class. My seat was revoked. I was reseated without cause." Silence. She let it hang. Another board member, Charles Beeman, leaned forward. "We heard there was a seating mix-up. We're looking into that." "I'm sure you are," Camille replied. "But while you investigate, I've already filed Clause 12. A rustle, a shift." Gallo blinked. Clause 12. "Of our pending partnership," Camille continued, "ethical breach activation. I notified legal upon landing. Your internal teams will receive confirmation shortly." The room chilled. Beeman cleared his throat. "Dr. Rivers, I understand this must have been frustrating." But Camille raised one hand. "Not high. Just enough. You do not get to define my threshold for dignity." They were quiet again. "I was moved," she said, "because the man who took my seat looked more like you, and I looked like the person you assumed didn't belong." She looked at each of them now. I am not here to request respect. I am here to remind you that your company's behavior has a cost. A cost I'm willing to make public if necessary. Gallo tried again. We value your leadership, Dr. Rivers. We hope to highlight this partnership as a major leap in inclusive innovation. Inclusion is not a PR term, she said sharply. It is action. They were listening now, but she could see the calculations in their eyes. Damage control, optics, control, always control. I'll still sign the deal, Camille said at last, her voice cool, heads lifted. But not here, she added. Not today, and not with this executive team intact. Silence deepened. I want a full restructuring of your passenger protocol teams, public accountability for the incident, and your crew, specifically those on Flight 489, must be relieved pending review, starting with the lead attendant and the captain. Gallo paled. You're asking us to fire our crew. I'm not asking, she said gently. I'm stating the cost. One of the men opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. Camille continued, if I do not see verified documentation of these changes within 48 hours, Neural Glide will publicly announce withdrawal from your platform, and I will personally testify before the Federal Transit Commission about the implicit bias patterns I've documented. She paused. The choice is yours. No one spoke. The lawyer finally said, Understood. Camille nodded once, then turned to leave. As she passed the assistants outside, she smiled. Kindly. Have a good day. Then she stepped into the elevator and disappeared from their view. Back in the car, Camille finally exhaled. Claire was waiting inside, laptop in hand. Media, Claire asked. Camille considered it. The elevator doors closing, the faces of the boardroom, the captain's tone, Macy's polite malice. Soon, Camille said. But not today. Claire smiled faintly. Got it. As they pulled away from the airport, Camille finally leaned her head back and let her shoulders fall. She had not just survived the flight. She had rewritten the altitude at which Dignity flew. And she wasn't done yet. Back in the air, 35,000 feet above Denver, Captain Richard Lowell's fingers tightened around the yoke as the plane held steady against a crosswind. But the turbulence shaking through his body wasn't from the atmosphere. It was from his phone. 2 hours earlier, after touching down in Chicago, he'd received a call from Oralis HR, a tone too flat, words too rehearsed, pending internal investigation, executive review, temporary relief of duty, no warning, no explanation beyond that one flight, and then a sentence that made the blood in his face drain. An internal clause had been activated by Neuroglide's CEO, Dr. Camille Rivers. He barely remembered the name at first. Just another passenger. Then the details unraveled in his mind like a coiled rope snapping free. The seat change, the first-class swap, the black woman with a calm voice and steady eyes. He hadn't looked at her twice that day. Now she was the name at the top of every report in his inbox. The autopilot beeped softly, reminding him to re-engage. His co-pilot, Dana, a young woman with sharp features and quick reflexes, looked over and frowned. You all right? Lowell didn't answer. He was already picturing the fallout. The headlines. Oralis was under federal contract negotiations. Every policy was under the microscope. And Camille Rivers wasn't just a passenger. She was a megaphone in a velvet glove. In the rear cabin, Macy Bruton was folding napkins at the service station, unaware that her badge access to crew scheduling had just been revoked. Her replacement shift was already reassigned. Her supervisor was drafting an incident report based on new footage and Theo Harmon's statement. She didn't know any of it yet, but she felt something. The unease of a storm building behind closed doors. Her interactions on Flight 48 and 9 had been routine, she told herself. Policy-driven, nothing personal, nothing cruel. She had followed the rules. Hadn't she? But rules were built by people. And sometimes, people built walls with them. At that moment, her intercom buzzed. Macy, Captain needs a word in the cockpit. She looked up, startled. Now. She straightened her blazer, smoothed her hair, and walked forward. Captain Lowell didn't rise when she entered. He simply looked at her. We're being reviewed, he said. She blinked. Reviewed for what? Flight 48 and 9. Passenger treatment. Seating reassignment. You know who she was. Macy didn't respond. Not because she didn't know, but because she hadn't cared then. And now it was too late. Lowell exhaled, slow and bitter. She's already pulled Clause 12. We're on hold. Macy. You. Me. Possibly Dana. Though she didn't do anything. Macy opened her mouth, then closed it again. The weight of her decisions was no longer abstract. It was in the room. And it had teeth. Lowell finally looked her in the eye. If you have anything to say, anything you want, documented, do it now. Because this won't be private for long. Macy stood there, hands gripping the edge of the cockpit wall. Her heart thudded. Her tongue felt heavy. But she said nothing. Behind them, 38 passengers continued sipping their ginger ale, watching sitcoms, and tracking their progress across the Midwest on little seat-back maps. Camille Rivers wasn't on this plane, but her presence had stretched into the sky. Back in Chicago, Camille sat in her corner suite overlooking Lake Michigan. The windows framed a steel-gray sky, broken by streaks of sunlight fighting their way through. She was alone. Claire had stepped out to handle a press embargo. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of a floor heater and the ticking of a wall clock. Camille stood at the window, her reflection cast against the glass. Her arms were crossed, her mind not on the meeting, not on the clause, but on the boy she used to mentor, Marcus Jameson, a high school senior who had once said to her, Ms. Rivers, how do you walk through places where people already decided you don't belong? She'd told him then, you walk through anyway, and when they look shocked, you let them feel it. She smiled faintly at the memory. Then her phone buzzed. A name appeared, Theo Harmon. She hesitated, then answered, Hello. His voice was steady but low. I wanted to say thank you. You don't have to, she replied. Yes, I do, because I've seen that kind of thing play out too many times, and it always gets swept under. Camille was quiet. Then she said, You were brave. I was tired. Theo said, But thank you. A pause. They pulled me from service, too, he added, almost as an afterthought. Camille's voice sharpened. You're being penalized. No, they said pending reassignment. Probably because I filed the statement. That's retaliation. She said, It's oralis. He replied. She closed her eyes for a beat. I'm going to fix that. You don't have to fight for me. Dr. Rivers. She said nothing for a moment, then replied, I'm not fighting for you. I'm fighting so you don't have to do it alone. He exhaled. That means more than you know. Stay close, she said. There may be more coming. They hung up. Camille turned back toward her desk. The laptop screen was still open to the document labeled Oralis Amendment. She opened a new tab and began drafting a policy statement. This one would not be quiet. It would address systemic gatekeeping, crew bias, boardroom complicity, and it would include a name, Theo Harmon. Because sometimes the strongest resistance didn't come from microphones or cameras. Sometimes it came from the quiet man who told the truth when it cost him. That afternoon, Auralis's communications team received an embargoed memo from Neuroglide Systems. It was calm, professional, and absolutely uncompromising. In 68 hours, if all recommendations were not fully adopted and actioned, the Neuroglide partnership would not only dissolve, it would go public with testimonies, data, video, and a full social responsibility audit. Camille signed it with a single phrase. This is not punishment. This is clarity. She closed the laptop and looked out again at the lake. Chicago was still gray, still cold, but something had shifted. Not outside, inside her. The silence she'd carried for years, every small slight, every coded dismissal, every boarded-up opportunity had finally cracked. And through that crack came light. 3 days later, Camille's name was everywhere. Not on billboards, not in celebrity gossip feeds, but in the places that mattered, in the Atlantic's opinion column, on the front page of the New York Times business section, on a banner beneath a split-screen broadcast of Auralis CEO Everett Shaw attempting damage control on CNBC. The headline was quiet, but piercing. BlackTech CEO denied seat. Triggers. Executive shakeup. Some articles called it a reckoning, some a public relations nightmare. Some tried to reduce it to a misunderstanding, but none could deny the facts. A woman of color, a denied seat, a silent witness, a multi-million-dollar partnership suddenly placed on hold until structural reform occurred. Camille didn't read most of the articles. She already knew what they would say, knew how narratives got shaped around palatability, how media often tiptoed around the real word for what had happened. Discrimination. No one wanted to say it plainly. Not yet. But Camille didn't need them to. She was already saying it for herself. On the 4th day, she walked into the Chicago studio of a late-night current affairs show hosted by journalist Dahlia Green. Dahlia was known for sharp interviews that didn't perform outrage, but dismantled power with calm intelligence. She had requested Camille specifically. As the cameras adjusted and sound checks concluded, Camille sat still in the guest chair, dressed simply in dark navy. Her natural curls were pinned back, her hands folded in her lap. Dahlia leaned forward slightly. Dr. Rivers, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. I want to begin not with the airline, but with you. When you boarded that flight last week, did you have any idea it would lead to this? Camille gave a soft smile. No. I just wanted to get to a meeting on time. And when your seat was reassigned, when no explanation was given, what did you feel Camille's expression didn't change? I felt tired. Not because it was new, but because it wasn't. This kind of thing happens all the time to people who don't have the microphone to push back. I just happen to have one now. There was a brief silence in the studio. Then Dahlia asked, Why did you choose to go public? Camille looked directly at her. Because if I didn't, they would have told the story for me, and they would have written it gently. I'm not interested in gentle edits of harm. I'm interested in honesty. Behind the scenes, the Auralis boardroom was anything but calm. The decision to suspend the cabin crew had drawn criticism from employee unions. The press release promising diversity retraining had been shredded online as too little, too late, and the pressure from Neuroglide was not only growing, it was spreading. 2 more partner companies quietly issued memos demanding policy overhauls before renewing their deals. A congressional subcommittee on transportation and civil rights reached out for a hearing. Everett Shaw, the CEO, stood by his office window on the 36th floor of Veralis HQ, looking down at the Chicago River. His chief of operations, Nancy Doyle, had just closed the door behind her. "We're bleeding in places we didn't know could bleed," he muttered. Nancy crossed her arms. "Camille Rivers is smarter than all of us combined. We never should have tried to contain this. We didn't contain anything," he snapped. "This was a rogue crew incident." "She was denied dignity at 30,000 feet, Nancy replied flatly. "That's not rogue. That's culture." Everett didn't respond. He was already picturing the next board meeting, the press, the shareholders, the unraveling. Back in Camille's apartment, her living room had turned into a war room. Claire was on a call with the nonprofit Fairflight, who'd reached out to collaborate on a federal audit proposal. Camille stood in front of the whiteboard, where a timeline of the incident had been drawn out with color-coded markers. She stared at a photo taped to the corner. It was of Theo Harmon, a still shot from airport CCTV just after the flight. He was helping an elderly woman carry her bag up the terminal ramp. No cameras had been asked for. No performance. Just him, doing what was right. "He lost his job," Camille said suddenly. Claire looked up. "They didn't terminate him officially," Camille continued, "but they reassigned him to a desk and then canceled his next 3 flight schedules. It's retaliation by another name." Claire walked over. "We can't fix everything." "I know," Camille said quietly, "but we can fix this." The next day, Camille made a surprise visit to the Fairflight headquarters downtown. When the director, a woman named Alondra Sanchez, saw her in the doorway, she stood up so fast she knocked over her chair. "You're actually here." "I don't do silence well," Camille said. They sat for hours, discussed policy gaps, legal blind spots and airline crew discretion, data collection inconsistencies. Camille offered not just partnership, but funding from Neuroglide's equity arm. No strings attached. That night, news broke again. Dr. Camille Rivers announces $5 million grant for National Passenger Equity Initiative. The response was immediate. Some praised her. Some accused her of being a race provocateur. Some wrote op-eds claiming she'd overreacted to a misunderstanding. Camille didn't respond to any of it. But she sent one email that night, short and pointed, to Everett Shaw. Subject response deadline. "Mr. Shaw, you have 36 hours to issue a public apology not just to me, but to every passenger denied basic dignity on your aircraft. If not, we will proceed with the federal civil action and joint press conference with Fairflight. This is not vengeance. It is structure." Camille Rivers. The next morning, an apology appeared on Oralis's website. It was signed by Everett Shaw himself, but it was Camille's tone everyone recognized. Not loud, not cruel, just unshakable. And it echoed louder than any press release. The apartment was quiet, not silent, never truly silent in the heart of downtown Chicago, but the kind of quiet that settles after something monumental. After the interview, after the apology, after the emails and headlines, after the calls stopped coming in, the noise outside got just a little dimmer. Camille stood at her kitchen counter, slowly stirring a mug of chamomile tea she hadn't yet tasted. Her eyes were distant, tracing the outline of the skyline beyond the window without really seeing it. She should have felt victorious. The CEO had apologized. Fairflight had announced the Passenger Equity Initiative. Neuroglide's shareholders had rallied behind her. And yet, in the absence of pressure, there was something else pressing on her. An ache she couldn't name. A knock on the door pulled her from the stillness. Claire wasn't due back until morning, and no one came to Camille's door without texting first. She hesitated, then walked over and opened it slowly. Standing there, holding a brown paper bag and looking slightly nervous, was Theo Harmon. "I hope I'm not crossing a line," he said, eyes searching hers. "I brought food." Camille blinked. "I'm sorry," he added. "I just figured. Someone should bring you dinner." She stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in cautiously, like someone unsure of his welcome. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, and the bag he carried smelled faintly of garlic and something roasted. Camille couldn't help but smile. "You cooked?" He gave a short laugh. "No. My neighbor owns a Dominican place on 53rd. I just carried it." They settled on the couch, plates between them. The overhead lights dimmed. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Just the soft clink of forks, the warmth of food, the kind of shared silence that feels more comforting than awkward. Eventually, Theo looked at her. "You okay?" Camille paused, then said, "I'm not sure." He nodded, accepting that answer like someone who understood it intimately. "You've been carrying this alone," he said, "even when the world was applauding." She stared down at her plate. Everyone sees the headlines, the speeches, the power moves, but no one sees what it costs. What's it cost you? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Parts of myself, the quiet ones, the pieces that feel things before they're expected to lead. I can't afford to cry on camera or shake during a board meeting. I have to be composed, strategic, every hour of the day." Theo leaned forward slightly. "That's the trap, isn't it? You carry the weight of everyone else's fear and turn it into strength, even when you're tired." She looked at him then, really looked. There was no pity in his expression, only recognition. "Do you ever miss who you were?" before she asked softly. Theo thought about it. "I miss believing the system just needed a little fixing. I miss thinking that being decent would be enough. And now I know better." They were quiet again. The warmth between them wasn't romantic. Not exactly. But it was intimate in its own way. A connection forged not through flirtation, but through something heavier. Shared purpose. Shared wounds. After dinner, Camille stood to clear the plates. Theo joined her, washing while she dried. It was strangely domestic, and for a few moments, she allowed herself to lean into the simplicity of it, the ease, the fact that no one in the room expected her to be anything other than herself. When the last dish was put away, Theo turned to her. "There's something else," he said. "Something you should know." She tilted her head. "I've been offered a job. Not by Airline, by another airline, smaller, more progressive. They want me to help write their passenger equity policy from scratch." Camille smiled, pride flickering across her features. "That's incredible." "It is," he said, then paused. "But I wouldn't have gotten the offer if I hadn't spoken out. You deserved it long before then." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah, maybe. But it took someone like you making space for it to matter." She felt the sting of tears threaten, but she held them back. Instead, she reached for his hand and squeezed it once. "You earned this, Theo. Take the offer, and then rewrite everything they told us was fixed." He smiled. "That's the plan." Later, after he left, Camille sat alone again, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt clear. She opened her journal for the first time in weeks. Not her business one, her personal one. The one where she wrote the kind of truth she never shared out loud. Tonight's entry was short. They tried to make the sky smaller for me. I didn't just reclaim my seat. I rebuilt the whole plane. And I'm not finished. Not yet. It began quietly, as most meaningful changes do. One airline announced its intention to adopt the Passenger Equity Initiative, a regional carrier out of Seattle that prided itself on radical hospitality. Then a second airline followed, not wanting to appear regressive. Then a third, this time international. Camille sat in her office at Neuroglide HQ, reviewing policy drafts sent by Fairflight. Every line carried a kind of weight, not because the language was perfect, but because it was being used, heard, considered. Boarding criteria based solely on ticket and verified identity. Immediate appeal process for denied seating. Mandated third-party review panel for passenger complaints involving bias. She underlined one line in red. No employee shall invoke security to mask discrimination. Claire looked up from her laptop across the table. That clause is going to get challenged. I know, Camille said. It's also going to save someone's dignity. Outside her window, the city buzzed in early spring, buds on the trees, children screaming across a park, people moving, still unaware of how close injustice often traveled beside them. Claire stretched. We should talk media again. They're shifting tone. Shifting too many headlines are starting to call this your crusade. Like it's personal vendetta. One op-ed called you a martyr complex in a pantsuit. Camille smirked. Classy. Should we respond? Camille thought for a moment, then shook her head. Let them talk. I didn't come this far to win the internet. That afternoon, she had her first in-person meeting with executives from the Federal Aviation Equity Commission. They were younger than she expected, nervous too. But what surprised her most was that they listened. She walked them through case data, anonymous interviews, survey results, video logs. She outlined the soft language of biased passengers labeled suspicious for speaking foreign languages, or wearing headscarves, or simply for boarding too confidently while black. One commissioner, a woman named Adrienne Holloway, leaned forward. What you're proposing, Dr. Rivers, isn't small. It changes airline discretion at a foundational level. That's the point. Camille said, airlines have had discretion. We've seen what they did with it. Adrienne nodded slowly. And if they fight back, Camille didn't flinch. Then they've told you exactly where they stand. The next morning, Camille received a calendar invite titled Private Visitor, Confirm Identity Required. It had been added by Claire without explanation. When Camille opened the attached note, it was only 3 words long. He asked politely. At 2 p.m. sharp, the visitor arrived. Camille recognized him instantly. Tall, crisp suit, polished posture, eyes that missed nothing and apologized for even less. Her father. It had been over 4 years. Camille, he said, stepping inside the conference room. You've built quite a storm. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she took in the way his jaw flexed when she didn't offer a hug. How he glanced at the chair before sitting, like he expected every room to defer to him. Why are you here? She asked. I'm concerned about your reputation, your business, about how this might be read by investors as emotional overreaction. There it was. The sentence she'd once written in her journal after their last conversation. He mistakes dignity for drama and calm for compliance. Camille kept her voice even. You didn't visit when I opened Neuroglide. You didn't call when I testified to the Senate. But now that people are uncomfortable, you show up. Her father folded his hands. This isn't personal, but it always is for you. He leaned forward, You are one of the few black women to ever lead a company at your level. That alone paints a target on your back. I don't want you giving them more reasons." She almost laughed. "Existing as myself has always been reason enough for them," she said. "They never needed me to give them anything." There was a long pause. Then he said, more softly than she expected, "You think I'm protecting the system. I'm not. I'm protecting you." Camille looked at him carefully, and for a moment, she saw it. Not control, not ego, but fear. The same fear he'd carried since her childhood. The fear that no matter how good, how brilliant, how polished she was, it wouldn't be enough to protect her from how the world sees her. "I don't want your protection," she said gently. "I want change." He stared at her for a long while, then nodded and stood. "I was wrong," he said. She blinked, not about the risks, but about your strength. You're not burning your legacy. You're building one. As he left the room, Camille sat in the silence he left behind. A different kind of silence than the one before. This one felt earned. That night, the backlash sharpened. One TV anchor questioned Camille's fitness for leadership if she was willing to jeopardize shareholder value over ideology. A media think piece accused her of bullying an already fragile airline industry. Claire stormed into her office, holding a printout. "This is pure spin." Camille took the article, read the first paragraph, and set it down. Her face didn't change. "I've been called worse," she said. "Yes. But now they're going after your qualifications, not just your message." Camille stood, walked to the window, and stared at the traffic far below. "They're hoping I'll get tired, that I'll blink, that I'll remember how many black women disappear the moment they stop smiling." She turned back to Claire. "But I'm not disappearing. What do we do?" Camille walked over to the whiteboard and picked up the red marker. She wrote 2 words in bold letters. "National hearing." Claire exhaled. "You're serious? They want to question my right to lead. Let them do it, under oath." Camille stood in front of the floor-length mirror in her apartment, adjusting the collar of her cream blazer. It was a muted color, almost forgettable. But that was the point. The media had spent days analyzing her wardrobe, calling red aggressive, navy too corporate, black too angry. So she chose cream neutral, quiet, still. Stillness could be power, too. Claire was waiting by the door, holding Camille's tablet, already synced with prepared statements, documents, and references. She gave a silent nod as Camille approached. "You ready?" Camille glanced back at the mirror. Her own reflection met her with a calm stare, but her stomach fluttered. "Define ready." Claire smiled softly. "You already did. On page 4 of the draft policy, you wrote, 'Readiness isn't a lack of fear. It's the decision to move forward anyway.'" Camille exhaled. Outside, the car waited. The city was gray with overcast skies. As they rode in silence, Camille rested her hand over her chest, feeling the slow, steady beat beneath. The hearing was being held in a federal building downtown. Marble floors, sweeping windows, and high ceilings designed to humble. Reporters lined the entrance. Protesters stood on either side, some holding signs of support, others calling her a race baiter, a corporate saboteur. Inside the chambers, rows of officials waited. Behind them, an audience of staffers, journalists, and curious citizens. At the center sat Camille, flanked by legal counsel and a single glass of water. The first questions were procedural. What were the metrics for bias reduction? Who would monitor compliance? How would enforcement avoid unintended consequences? She answered each with clarity, referencing data, legal precedent, and case studies from other sectors. Then came the tone shift. A congressman from Georgia leaned into his microphone. Dr. Rivers, do you believe that racial bias exists in every negative airline encounter involving a black passenger? Camille tilted her head. I believe racial bias is often present where discretion lacks accountability. He smirked. That sounds like a clever way of saying yes without proof. Camille didn't blink. I believe that when patterns repeat across time, companies owe us more than denial. They owe us reform. There was a murmur from the crowd. The next speaker, a woman from Ohio, softened her voice. You've been called brave. Some say you're risking everything. But critics argue that your story only went viral because you're an executive, that the everyday black woman has no such platform. How do you respond? Camille looked down at her folded hands, then back up. She's right, she said. I had power. And even then, I was humiliated. So imagine those who don't. This isn't just my fight. It's theirs. I'm just loud enough to get through the noise. She felt her throat tighten, not from nerves, from memory, from something much older. That night, back in her apartment, Camille couldn't sleep. The adrenaline had faded, but the past had resurfaced. She sat on the couch, clutching an old leather-bound journal she hadn't opened in years. Inside were pages from a much younger Camille, scribbled notes, drawings, and this one entry, dated May 14, 1997. Today my teacher said I was too assertive when I answered first. She moved me to the back. I think maybe she's scared of how much I know. Or maybe she doesn't like that my voice isn't quiet. Mama says the world isn't always fair to little girls who speak with their chin up. Camille ran her fingers over the ink. She remembered that classroom, the shame of being moved, the way her classmates watched, some confused, others amused, the way no one explained it, but everyone understood it. That was the first time she learned silence could be a punishment. The second time came in college, when she was asked to smile more during her engineering presentations because your resting face can come off harsh. The third came when an investor, during a pitch meeting, called her impressive for a black female founder, as though it were a compliment. Each moment had built a wall she never meant to carry, brick by brick, comment by comment, and still, she climbed it. The next morning, she awoke to a new wave of media backlash. A viral clip from the hearing had been edited out of context to make her sound combative. A popular radio host called her a ticking time bomb with a Harvard degree. Her social media feed overflowed with vitriol death threats, slurs, accusations. She dropped her phone on the kitchen counter and stared out the window. The clouds had broken, letting soft morning light filter through. Claire arrived moments later, breathless. I've drafted a response, a public statement. We can take legal action on the more violent threats. Camille listened, then shook her head. No statement. Claire froze. Camille, they're painting you as unhinged? That's because I didn't flinch. So what do we do? Camille turned toward her. We remind them who's watching. Later that day, Camille walked alone through Jackson Memorial Park, wearing no makeup, no suit, no badge, just herself. A few people recognized her, offering soft smiles or hushed thank yous, but most didn't. She liked it that way, near the lake. She sat on a bench where two teenagers were arguing over music. One noticed her and said, "Hey, aren't you the airplane lady?" She smiled. "Something like that. You made the whole industry mad," he said with a grin. That's kind of dope. Camille laughed. It wasn't the goal, but it worked. Right. My aunt said she got an apology last week after being moved to the back for random selection. That's new. She nodded slowly. That's the idea. The second teen, quieter, looked at her for a long time before asking, You ever afraid someone's going to come for you? Like, for real? Camille was quiet. Then she said, Every day. The teen frowned. Then why do it? Camille looked out over the lake, at the ripples dancing in the wind, because I remember what it felt like to be invisible, and because sometimes making people uncomfortable is the first step to making them care. They didn't say anything else, but they stayed, and somehow that was enough. The email hit Claire's inbox at 6:13 a.m., with no subject line and one PDF attachment. The sender was anonymous, the domain encrypted. Inside the document, excerpts from Camille's college journal, painful, raw entries written when she was just 19. Some pages were about imposter syndrome. Others confessed to depression. One page, taken out of context, detailed a fantasy of walking away from the pressure forever. Claire stared at the screen, stomach twisting. She knew exactly what this was. Weaponization of vulnerability. By 7 a.m., conservative media outlets were already running with it. Is Camille Rivers stable enough to lead? Reform Journal reveals. Disturbing thoughts behind Airline critic. Another woke meltdown. Coming by 8:30 hashtags were trending. We ground her or Rivers unfit. Journalgate. Camille hadn't even seen it yet. She was doing yoga on her balcony, barefoot and calm, when Claire called, Camille, you need to see this. There was a silence after Claire finished explaining, long enough to make Claire wonder if the line had dropped. Then Camille said softly, They're not even pretending to care about justice anymore. They want blood. She asked Claire to forward the file. She read every word, slowly, painfully, like reopening a healed wound. Then she closed her laptop, stood still for a few seconds, and said, We're going live. Today. Claire blinked. You want a press conference? No. No scripts. No spokesperson. I'm speaking unfiltered, human to human. At 11:15 a.m., Camille Rivers stepped onto a simple stage at Neuralglide's rooftop garden. No banners, no branding, just her, a chair, a mic, and a wind that wouldn't sit still. More than 30 cameras rolled. Live streams went up on every major platform. Tens of thousands tuned in. She sat down slowly, let the silence settle. Then she began. Some of you have read something deeply personal about me this morning. Pages from a journal I wrote when I was 19. A girl drowning in expectations, unsure of her place, terrified she'd disappoint everyone. She paused. I wrote about fear, about self-doubt. I wrote things I never meant for public eyes, but they were real, honest, and messy. She looked directly at the cameras. And maybe that scares some of you. Maybe you want a movement led by someone perfect, someone untouchable. But I'm not her. I'm just someone who's been broken and chose not to stay that way. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was sacred. She continued. The irony of the journal they leaked. It's the very proof that I've lived the pain I'm trying to stop. That the shame, the silence, the being second-guessed in every room, it's not theoretical for me. It's my life. Claire stood watching from the side, mouth slightly open. It wasn't just a speech. It was an act of reclaiming. Camille took a breath. And to the young woman watching this, yes, you who has pages like mine, written in the dark, never shared, know this: your pain doesn't disqualify you. It prepares you. And it's not weakness to feel. It's what makes you dangerous to systems built on silence. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't have to. They felt it. That afternoon, a New York Times opinion writer called Camille's response a masterclass in controlled authenticity. A viral tweet read, "They tried to cancel her with her own truth. She made it her weapon." But that didn't stop the next hit. At 6:02 p.m., a reporter named Daniel Kramer posted an exclusive article. Camille Rivers once called airline safety training performative theater. Should we trust her judgment? The quote was from an off-the-record conversation Camille had years earlier at a DEI conference. Someone had recorded it without her knowledge. Camille read the article on her couch, curled beneath a gray blanket. Her mind was calm, but her heart wasn't. She felt the tremor she hadn't felt in months. Exhaustion, not the kind sleep could fix, the kind that lived in your bones when every step forward triggered a new attack. She didn't call Claire this time. She called her mother's voice, worn and steady, answered with a hum, like she'd known the call was coming. "They're coming for you from all sides," Camille whispered. Her mother didn't hesitate. "Because you're close." Close to what? To making them feel it. The discomfort. The loss of unchecked power. And they hate that. There was a pause. Camille asked quietly, "Do you ever wish I'd just—" Stopped her mother. Didn't yell. Didn't give a pep talk. She said, "I wish the world hadn't made this your burden, but I've never once wished you were smaller." Camille closed her eyes. Let that truth land. The next morning, Neural Glide's board convened an emergency session. Claire sent a message at 8:47 a.m. "Camille, board wants to meet." Quiet tone, not hostile but cautious. You know what that means. Camille did. It meant they were testing whether her fire had become a liability. She walked into the boardroom knowing she wouldn't plead, wouldn't shrink, but she also wouldn't fight in the old way. She let them speak. Concerns about shareholder image, risk to funding, executive optics. Then one member asked, "Dr. Rivers, would you consider stepping aside temporarily while this calms down?" Camille folded her hands. "No. Simple. Measured. Firm. I will not validate an attack designed to exploit my humanity. If I step aside now, it tells every black woman who's been dismissed for being too much that the world was right." She stood. "Neural Glide exists because I didn't wait for permission. I won't start now." After a tense pause, the board chair nodded slowly. Understood. Outside the building, someone had chalked words on the sidewalk in bright pink letter fly. Claire sent her a photo. Camille stared at it for a long time. Then she smiled. Not for the cameras, not for survival, but because it felt like the ground under her was beginning to shift. And this time, it wasn't breaking, it was rising. Camille adjusted the mic clip to her blazer, fingers steady but her heartbeat less so. The room buzzed low murmurs, shuffling chairs, uneasy glances. It wasn't a press event, not a courtroom, no cameras today. This was the airline's internal town hall. The room was filled with over 200 flight attendants, gate agents, customer service reps, and junior executives. Many of them looked tired, some curious, others openly skeptical. But all of them were here because their world had been shaken by Camille's story. And today, they were being asked to listen. Camille had asked for this herself. Not the company, not her team. She wanted to stand in front of the people whose lives and jobs were directly touched by the firestorm her experience had sparked. The moderator introduced her with a polite nod. Camille stepped up, clearing her throat gently before she began. "Thank you for letting me speak with you," she said. I know I've become a headline, and for many of you, maybe even a threat. But before that flight, before the photos and articles, I was just a tired woman heading home." She paused. Let the room breathe. "What happened on that flight? It wasn't the first time I was told to move, to wait, to prove myself just a little bit more. But it was the first time I chose not to shrink." Her eyes scanned the room. "I didn't speak out because I hate this industry. I spoke out because I've loved it since I was a child. Planes in the sky meant freedom to me, possibility, and I want that promise to be true for everyone who boards a flight." There were quiet nods, a few crossed arms. One flight attendant whispered to another, and Camille noticed but didn't flinch. She continued, "I know some of you feel like I painted all of you with one brush. That's never been my intention. And I'm here, in this room, because I believe the best change starts with the people on the ground." She stepped back, inviting conversation. The moderator opened the floor. The first few questions were cautious. A gate agent asked about implementation, what new bias protocols would mean for their fast-paced, stressful jobs. A senior attendant spoke about fears of being scapegoated by corporate. Camille answered with empathy and honesty, acknowledging the pressure, outlining her vision for training that was constructive, not punitive. Then a woman stood up near the back, slim, mid-30s, in uniform. She didn't take the mic. She didn't need it. Her voice was clear, steady. "My name is Regina. I've been flying for 12 years. I'm black. I've been mistaken for a cleaner twice in this very airport, and I've watched my white colleagues get more routes, more first-class rosters, more respect." The room went still. "But I also need to say this: what happened to you was awful. Camille, no doubt. But when it went public, it felt like the rest of us got swept up into it. Suddenly, I had passengers looking at me like I was guilty by association. And that hurt, because I fought so hard to be good at what I do." Camille looked at her, genuinely listening. Regina continued, "Some days I feel invisible up there, smiling, serving, absorbing everyone's mood at 30,000 feet. And the truth is, sometimes I've been the one asked to enforce policies that weren't fair, but I didn't know how to say no." Her voice cracked, just slightly. Camille stepped forward. "Can I come to you?" she asked softly. Regina nodded. Camille walked across the room, not rushed, not dramatic, just human. She stood beside Regina and took the second mic. "You're right," she said. "This fight shouldn't have made you feel smaller. It should have made space for your story, too." She turned to the audience. "The truth is, this isn't about one airline or one crew. It's about the systems we inherit without question. And sometimes, we get used to those systems even when they hurt us." She looked back at Regina. "Thank you for saying what needed to be said, for not letting me forget that I'm not the only one fighting this fight." They exchanged a nod, not performance, recognition. Someone clapped, then a second. Then the room filled with applause, not thunderous, but steady, real. After the session, Camille stayed behind. People lined up not to argue, but to talk. Quietly, honestly. A young white flight attendant confessed that her father had sent her a racist meme last month about DEI gone too far. And for the first time, she told him it wasn't funny. A crew scheduler talked about how her all-white hiring panel never felt wrong to her until now. An older pilot told Camille he used to assume every complaint was exaggerated until he caught himself interrupting his black co-pilot one too many times. Camille didn't respond to every comment with solutions. Sometimes she just nodded. Sometimes she said thank you. Later that night, she sat in her apartment, barefoot, a glass of tea cooling on the table beside her. She replayed Regina's words in her mind. I've watched my white colleagues get more routes, more first-class rosters, more respect. Camille knew that pain too well. And yet, she also knew Regina wasn't blaming her. She was asking to be seen, fully. The next morning, Camille published a blog post on her personal site. No press release, no PR team. It was titled, "The Ones We Leave Out." She wrote, "We often focus on the pain of those who speak first. But justice isn't complete if it leaves behind those still trying to find their voice. To the airline workers, the hidden labor, the quiet battles on every jet bridge, you are part of this story. And I see you." The post was shared over 2 million times in 3 days. It reached employee inboxes, school classrooms, church groups, and even an airline union meeting in Denver where, reportedly, it moved 2 attendees to tears. Camille wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to listen, and somehow that made her louder than ever. The invitation was unexpected. A primetime town hall on national television. Not just any network. GNV, one of the most watched stations in the country, had cleared its 800 p.m. slot for a live forum titled, "Justice at 30,000 feet, where do we go from here?" It was flashy. It was risky. But Claire looked Camille in the eyes and said, "They want to put you in the hot seat, but you've already lived there." So Camille agreed. Not to prove anything, not to salvage reputation. She went because this was her story, and too many others hadn't been allowed to finish theirs. The studio lights were brighter than she expected. The audience was handpicked to reflect every side: airline workers, former passengers, policy critics, activists, and 3 former flight attendants who had walked off the job after the first week of the backlash. The host was polished and sharp. He introduced Camille with a recap video clips of her walking through the terminal that day, shots of her press statement, headlines both supporting and doubting her. Then she stepped out to a quiet room. No applause. She sat on a simple stool. No table. No glass of water. Just air between her and everyone watching. The host started gently, asking her to take us back to the moment it began. She recounted it calmly. The boarding pass. The confrontation. The denial. But she didn't focus on rage. She focused on what it cost. She described the moment after she sat in coach, when a little black girl across the aisle peeked at her from behind a pink stuffed giraffe. How the girl smiled, not understanding what had just happened, but maybe one day she would. That moment, Camille said, was when she decided silence wasn't an option. Halfway through the forum, the tone shifted. One panelist, an airline executive in a Navy suit, said bluntly, "Dr. Rivers, you've started what some are calling a dangerous trend: employees being judged publicly before internal reviews are completed. Doesn't that undermine due process?" Camille didn't flinch. "What I started," she said, "was a conversation your company had avoided for decades. If due process means silence for the victim and reassignment for the offender, then yes, I'm proud to have disrupted it." The room was silent. Another panelist, a professor of ethics, asked, "Would you say you've forgiven the crew?" Camille exhaled. "Forgiveness is complex," she said, "but I no longer carry anger toward individuals. What I carry is clarity. The systems that shape their behavior still exist. Until those change, forgiveness is incomplete." The moderator nodded, then said, "We have one more question, from someone watching remotely." The screen behind Camille lit up. A woman appeared, mid-50s, graying hair pulled back, flight uniform. "My name is Linda Farrell. I was the lead flight attendant on Flight 267. I was the one who told you that first class wasn't available." The studio seemed to collectively inhale. Camille's back remained straight, her breath steady. Linda continued, "I've watched this from the shadows. I was told to stay quiet while legal sorted things out. But silence has eaten me alive. Because I need to tell you something." Her voice cracked. "I was scared. Not of you. Of the system. Of the unwritten rules that said if I made a scene, if I questioned the gate call, I might lose my job. So I followed the path of least resistance. I chose silence. And in doing so, I helped hurt you." Camille's eyes didn't leave the screen. Linda said, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to say it out loud. I was wrong. The studio was completely still." Camille reached for the mic. "I don't hate you," she said, her voice soft. "I hate that you were made to choose between your dignity and your paycheck. That's what this is about." She stood slowly. "Linda, you're not the villain. The villain is the fear that made silence easier than doing what was right." The host leaned in. "Dr. Rivers, what do you hope happens after tonight?" Camille turned to the audience. "I hope we stop calling it progress when we train people to smile through disrespect. I hope we stop rewarding compliance over courage. I hope the next time someone sees a black woman being dismissed or doubted, they don't reach for their phone first. They speak." She stepped down from the stage, walking toward the audience. "I never wanted to become a symbol, but since I am, let that symbol stand for something real. Not just for corporate policy or press conferences, for humanity, for the thousands of people, employees and passengers alike, who've swallowed their voices to keep the peace." She reached the front row, where the airline CEO sat with his legal counsel. She looked at him, calm and resolute. "Mr. DeWitt," she said, "I'm not suing your airline. Not because I can't win, but because I'd rather invest in a new model than fight an old one." He blinked. Camille continued, "But I am buying a seat on your board." The room stirred, not ceremonial, not symbolic. "I'm bringing real strategy, real budget control, and real metrics. If your team agrees, I will serve for 1 year unpaid and work with your employees at every level to rebuild what this system broke." The CEO nodded, slowly, stiffly, then said, "Deal." The studio erupted not with cheers, but with something heavier. A collective exhale, the sound of something long buried finally being named. That night, Camille walked out into the city air with Claire beside her. The wind picked up. Somewhere nearby, a busker played soft jazz. Claire turned to her. "That was unbelievable." Camille shook her head. "No, that was overdue." She looked up at the sky. No planes visible tonight, but she didn't need one to feel like she had flown. Back in her apartment, she pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of 10 letters, each one a scholarship award from the new Rivers Sky Fund. The fund had been her quiet project all along, seeded with her own money, no PR, no announcement. Each scholarship would go to a black woman studying aviation, aeronautics, or public policy. On the front of each envelope was handwritten one phrase, "Boarding now." Sometimes, the loudest protest is the one that doesn't raise its voice. Camille Rivers didn't storm out. She didn't shout back. She stood still. She told the truth. And in doing so, she moved an entire industry to look in the mirror. Discrimination doesn't always wear a badge or carry a sign. Sometimes it hides behind policies, smiles, and silence. But silence has a cost, and Camille refused to pay it with her dignity. This wasn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It was about who we make space for and who we quietly push back. So the next time you see someone being dismissed, overlooked, or told they don't belong, remember Camille, and ask yourself, what seat are you willing to give up so someone else can finally have theirs? If this story moved you, helped you reflect, or made you pause, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. And stay tuned, because the next story might be one the world forgot, but you never will. Thank you for flying with us.